Hello guys. So welcome to the webinar on AngularJS. My name is Pradeep and I'll be walking you through the introduction to AngularJS webinar in this session. So as I said, I have 12 years of experience in software development. I do have 2 years of experience in front-end development. Most of my expertise is into server-side programming. And this session will be giving you insight on what is AngularJS, why do we need one, what are the pain points that it addresses, a little bit of history of AngularJS, and then we'll be covering AngularJS, what it provides in by having a hands-on demo. So I encourage audience to follow along with the webinar and also start pouring in your questions. I'll be taking some time to answer all your questions in the middle, as well as I'll be keeping dedicated time for answering all your questions at the end of the program. So whenever you feel free to pour in your questions, whatever the doubts that you have, while I will be walking you through the introduction to AngularJS. Okay, friends. So let's start. Let's begin with an introduction to JavaScript. AngularJS is one of the most popular JavaScript framework around, and it is built on the most controversial language, which is the JavaScript itself. Right. So let's get into a bit of history before we understand, as this will give a thorough insight on what is the pain point that AngularJS is addressing and how does it address. Okay. So initially, if you see in the days of 2000 and early 2000, we were mostly working on systems like monolithic applications, where we were working on banking applications, insurance applications, where most of the emphasis was given on the functionality or the features for the particular application, right? So we were having banking application where we had issues, challenges in terms of concurrency, working huge, handling all the requests, uh, managing the database, right? We had challenges in persistence, right? So evolve later, gradually the database side got much more stabilized with things like RDBMS, right? And then the challenge was on the application side. So there were J2E frameworks came into picture, where they were able to handle all the user requests, transactions, right? And most of the the stabilization of application layer happened. And then we there were some frameworks which came like Hibernate, ORM frameworks, which used to address the database and object world mapping. So this was pretty much stabilized, and much of the emphasis was still on the server side programming. So, and how we used to develop, or how we used to see the web, or how we used to see an application is both mostly by the HTML, and the UI was integrated as part of the application tier itself. So we used to develop the web pages, and it used to be residing on the server side. Then later, uh, there were a lot of design patterns and principles that were applied, and then one of the hugely famous framework, that was struts on Java stack, came into picture, which addresses the problem of basically having a dedicated model, view, and controller. Correct. So a model used to address all the business logic. The controller used to take the request and route it to a particular model, and then the view was only rendering the HTML data. So initially there was a time wherein people used to write the HTML in the servlets itself. Correct. After that, the JSP specification was evolved, wherein HTML designers or the web developers could actually write the tags, custom tags or built-in JSP tags, and the business logic was abstracted in the servlets. But if you notice, at that time also, the JSP was residing on the server. So, and later, if you see on the front end technology side, okay, so if you see on the front end technology side, there was a lot of revolution happened. And for example, the JavaScript initially was only looked at as a toy language. It was used only for a minor validation on the UI fields, and just a little bit of you know event handling or DOM manipulation on the servers on the client side. And basically nothing much was happening. The Java developers or .NET developers were taken for granted that they could easily work on JavaScript. There are also challenges across different browsers, as all the browsers have their own implementation of the DOM parsing, DOM engine. Each of the browser has a different standards in terms of implementation the DOM, and DOM is not which is consistent across all the browsers. So much of the blame of the DOM had to be taken or borne by JavaScript language itself. And one more thing, that the developers working on JavaScript, they try to use their existing knowledge on Java or .NET while writing JavaScript without understanding or without having dedicated time to learn JavaScript. So they used to, without understanding the language, when they try to implement JavaScript, the bugs or the inconsistencies that they were seeing, they used to blame JavaScript for not doing the same thing. All this had to change with an advent of Web 2.0, when the emphasis started shifting on the client side or on the UI side. So where rich web application, rich internet applications came into picture, and then all of a sudden in few years, uh, people started using Ajax. So wherein the browser could actually make a HTML request to the server. So that gave a tremendous boost to JavaScript, and developers started taking JavaScript seriously. Developers actually started looking at JavaScript and started discovering that there are many good patterns and the features which are available in JavaScript. And later, the only thing that they had to isolate was to work on the DOM inconsistencies across different browsers and different versions. So a developer community came into picture, and then they started developing a first version of a framework which was browser agnostic, and that was basically the evolution or the invention of jQuery. So jQuery came in picture, which had all the browser agnostic changes were abstracted from the developers, and developers could write jQuery code, and that would assure that it would work on all the browsers. One more interesting thing happened is people, to avoid JavaScript, to learn to not learn JavaScript, they started using different alternatives. Like for example, in Java world, people started developing a framework. Google came up with a framework called GWT, so in which you could write Java code and it used to compile into JavaScript code. But it was not a right way of writing the JavaScript, just that we couldn't learn JavaScript. Writing JavaScript through Java was not a good decision that was done, and hence there was an Java jQuery was most popular to write the JavaScript. But here also, if you observe that most of the DOM manipulation were done by the developers. So this kind of programming is called as imperative programming, wherein the developers will write the code to actually work on the DOM manipulation, and all the logic will be done by the using the jQuery framework, right? Okay, start pouring in questions. I will be answering all the questions. Yes. So since we were talking about DOM manipulation, DOM inconsistencies, each and every browser, say for example Chrome or Firefox or Internet, has their own DOM engine, DOM parsing engine, which actually works on the DOM in their own way. So jQuery sits on top of this and then works browser agnostic. So we can work on jQuery and work on the DOM manipulation, but internally all the heavy lifting of exact runtime DOM manipulation will be taken care by jQuery. But if you see, we nowadays lot of emphasis was is being taken over on the UI front, wherein people are more becoming more aware. There are a lot of frameworks that are coming into picture, each addressing its own unique feature in the client side framework, right? And then there was one framework which was AngularJS that came into picture. So this session we'll see what is AngularJS trying to address, right? How is it different from jQuery that we already have, and what are the advantages that we get when we use AngularJS. So a bit of agenda here. So as we see, what are the pain points that AngularJS is addressing, what are the companies that is AngularJS, what are the features that AngularJS is providing, what is client-side MVC and what is the MVWM architecture. And I'll also show you run through a basic AngularJS program, and we'll see some of the features of AngularJS. And I'll also be introducing you to something called a single page application, and what is the advantages of going with single page application, right? This is what we were talking about when we say about a DOM. So DOM is nothing but it's it's basically a node which contains all the HTML markups and which will be passed by the browser. The browser will understand only HTML tags, and each basically the HTML the browser, when it reads the HTML, it parses and then it creates a DOM tree. So as we can see, DOM is a structural representation of a document, and it provides a programming interface which allows you to change the style and content of a page. So all these tags which are defined by HTML will be understood by browser. It parses the web page, and then it creates a DOM which will be runtime. It will be the browser will understand and render it on the screen, right? So every browser comes up with its own parsing engine that is called as DOM engine. Yeah, so a bit of thought here. So it means that if I can manipulate the DOM, I would be able to change page content. But how do I do that? So as you can see, once the DOM has rendered the page, we have to use some JavaScript method to manipulate the DOM. For example, we can use the ID attribute to identify a specific um, tag, the HTML tag on the browser. Once we get the handle of the ID, the element, we can work on the ID element to actually do some operation on that. We can hide that, we can show that, we can perform a click operation on that. So all the things can be done once we get handle of that particular element. So in HTML we do that by using selectors. We can use the ID selector, or we can use a dot class selector. And jQuery took it to a next league, wherein we could use the CSS selectors that we use for styling. The same CSS selectors can be used along with jQuery to actually get the hold of the elements on the web page. Yeah, so this is the one that we are talking about, how to manipulate the DOM. We have a HTML markup. This is just a small example before we see what is the pain point that jQuery is solving, and internally what is the next step that AngularJS evolves on top of jQuery, right? So here is a traditional way of working on the DOM using JavaScript. So here we have all the HTML elements loaded, and we also have a script tag here which has a function. So just interrupt me whenever you feel so that I'll be looking at the questions panel, and if I had to address or something that is raising, I will just address it and then and there. Fine. So back to the topic. We have a HTML as I was talking to you, and then we have a JavaScript function. So when the DOM renders this, the browser actually goes through the script tag, and it identifies that this is a JavaScript code that has to be executed, right? So we have some APIs to actually manipulate the DOM. For example, document.getElement by ID, and if we give a particular ID element, we'll be getting handle of uh, the element, in this case the h1 element, which is the header element, right? and I'll be able to set the text. I'll be able to set the text for this element by using the inner HTML. And this is a plain vanilla JavaScript that I'm using here. And then this should be able to manipulate the DOM. At the runtime, what happens once the document is loaded, then this JavaScript code comes into picture. It gets a handle of the element, and it sets the ID with the new value that we have. Yes, so this was the earlier thing that we were using, but since I was talking to you about the browser inconsistency, pretty much simple features can be done through using JavaScript, but more complicated things you have since the browser had independent implementation, so it is not possible for having a single code which works on all the browsers. Correct. So how do we do that? We can use a jQuery, which is more sophisticated and evolved stable framework, through which it gives us a way to abstract the browser agnostic things and then work only with the jQuery API. So jQuery comes up with an API. We can use that to actually use it with normal selectors, and we'll be able to manipulate the DOM, and it gives us a API wherein we can load the JavaScript file, and then once we have loaded, once a document is ready, that means the document is loaded, we'll be able to um, work on the DOM elements. We can assign the event functions like click, like hover. All elements can be attached within events. So the good part is basically we have an abstracted way, and then it is more neat in terms of that we can work with the API. But the bad part that I can see here is that basically we have a bunch of JavaScript functions that are loaded into our HTML, and basically we are implementing the functions and then adding the DOM manipulation code ourselves. We are adding the DOM manipulation code ourselves through jQuery functions, and it becomes a nightmare if an application is growing huge, since the only thing that jQuery supports is basically we can have some components, or we can add some functions. We can add some functions for DOM manipulation, right? So jQuery was good at something, but there had to be a more sophisticated framework to handle in a large scale application. Okay. So traditionally, the view modifies the DOM to represent the data and manipulates the DOM, or invokes jQuery and add the behavior. Okay. So coming into the AngularJS. So what is that? AngularJS is trying to address this issue. So AngularJS is not just for DOM manipulation. It is much more beyond DOM manipulation. In one sentence, AngularJS is a complete web development framework on the client side. And internally it uses JavaScript and jQuery. It uses jQuery for DOM manipulation, but along with for DOM manipulation, it has several other features. And most one, or the most used, or the most popular, is one of this framework called as MVC. So with the power of AngularJS, we can have the client-side MVC framework, the one that we used to have it on the server side. Remember, in the old days, we used to have MVC framework on the server side. That time we used to have um, the client side, the server side was heavy, and in terms of the client side was dumb. We used to do all the logic on the server side, and view used to be just representing the data. The server side was intelligent and the client side was dumb. But in this case, the AngularJS will take the whole notion and brings the MEC side from the server side to the client side. And with this, what we get is we get a neat little MEC framework on the client side, and then the server can be thought or server can be thought of just providing the data. So we have intelligent client on the client side, and we have dumb server, just we use the server for providing the data. Okay. So how do we connect the client side and server side? Is basically the server will be providing a RESTful service, and then client will be making all the decisions in terms of the providing the routes and calling the right service, getting the service, manipulating the service, manipulating the data, filtering the data, and then rendering it on the view. So apart from that, AngularJS is very good for building single page applications, where we have a desktop kind of applications, where we have some set of a major portion of the web page static, but only the things that gets changed will be loaded from the server. So I'll be talking to you about, I'll be showing you this with an example of where we are and what is the advantage that we get. So this is how it works. So we have a HTML, we have browser. comes with a static DOM. And then when we add this AngularJS into the into our include that AngularJS plug JavaScript library into our application, it actually searches for the ng app. It actually searches for this keyword, and then I'll be talking about what is this keyword, and do we actually bind it, or what is the implications of having this. Okay, and then it actually compiles that, and then it creates a dynamic DOM. Okay, and then we'll be seeing this in detail. So this is the way that AngularJS approaches. Okay, it's not just a framework to address one specific thing. There are so many things that it addresses, and we'll be looking at most of them, at least a high level view of what are the different features that AngularJS provides, right? So first thing, the routing. So for a particular route, which is the controller that needs to be added, what is the view that needs to be displayed, for a particular controller, what is the service that is actually getting us the data. All these things can be configured in the client side, right? And an HTTP request will be made to the server side, whether it is a Java service, or it is Node.js, or is it any RESTful service. For example, you can have any kind of backend technology, Ruby on Rails, and then it is actually agnostic as long as it provides a RESTful or JSON response. Okay, so first we have the AngularJS is downloaded because it's a JavaScript file. The browser makes a request to download the AngularJS file. It actually bootstrap the AngularJS application. Basically, AngularJS comes up with so many features, or so many dependencies. Like all those things has to be bootstrapped so that the AngularJS application can run. So bootstrapping involves, creating an environment in where the AngularJS application will be working. It provides an environment. The HTML pages is fully downloaded, and a callback is executed. So Angular traverses the DOM and then find an ng app directory. This is at the starting point of an application, where it actually starts bootstrapping the entire application. When it sees AngularJS ng app, it knows that it's an AngularJS app. It will also load all the modules or the directives, all the services that it needs to run this AngularJS application. And then we have, it locates the element consisting ng app directory and defines it as the top of the DOM. Okay, anything which is inside ng app will be treated as the root element for that particular application. And also we have something called as dependency injection. So if you're coming from a background of Java and J2EE, so dependency injection was introduced in Spring, wherein we don't have to worry about the dependencies in our application. We can externalize those configuration, and at runtime Spring will use to provide those dependencies. Same thing in AngularJS also. This is one of the feature wherein AngularJS will give you all the dependency injections that we have defined in our modules. Fine. So this is one of the features where dependency injection, AngularJS injects the dependencies, whether it is a service or it is a factory or a directive. Anything will be injected by AngularJS. Okay, and we also have something called as root scope, which is a parent for all the scopes that we'll see when we dive into the hands-on exercise. Okay, and then it compiles a DOM, and then once it is bootstrapped, everything is said. Now it only depends on the our application logic, the business logic that we have, for example, for each action that we have. Okay, so internally for DOM manipulation it uses jQuery only, not specifically the jQuery that we use, a mini version of jQuery, the mini version of jQuery, but we can also tell AngularJS to use the full version of jQuery. I'll be showing you how to do that. Okay, so a little bit of AngularJS, how did it come? There are other frameworks also that are popular, like Express.js, Ember.js, Knockout.js, right? But each of them address a specific one or two data points. But with AngularJS, the beauty is that it does a lot of other framework, a lot of other functionality out of the box. I'll be showing you when we start with the AngularJS application, we'll be seeing so many benefit that comes out of the box. Actually, it started with the developers working in Google for a particular project where they were using GWT, and the entire application was not making much of progress in GWT. So developers started came up with a framework for AngularJS, and he said that this entire application, which was developed in 6 weeks, can be done in 2 weeks. So that's how that was his claim. And then he did it. He came up with the first version of AngularJS, and it was widely popular in the Google company. So they made it an open source, and from then AngularJS has taken leaps and bounces. It has taken so much of it has grown in leaps and bounces. Okay, it was developed in 2009 by Misko Harvey and Adam Morgan. So what is the scope of AngularJS today? So most of the companies they have started adapting to AngularJS. Not only AngularJS, most of the client-side libraries are evolving, and there is a lot of awareness on client-side programming, mostly from the user-driven applications. And you can see the trend from Indeed.com, where we have a graph of how AngularJS has taken its course of the month. See the growth. If you see, it has gained a lot of popularity from its beginning, and then it is on its increasing path. So definitely a good sign for a developer, because one thing is that when we have a stable framework, the community is also very strong in AngularJS. And once the community is strong, we'll be able to use that in production line of applications. Right? Yes, community features. This is what I was talking about, the built-in modules or built-in features that Angular comes up with. We have strong support for routing. We can have complex routing, for example, when a particular feature has to, when a particular route is created, what is a controller needs to be loaded, what is a controller, and what is the uh, partials that has to be loaded for that particular route. We also have dependency injection, wherein AngularJS will inject the dependencies at runtime. Um, AngularJS is built from ground up, keeping testing in mind. So we can write unit test cases on the client side. It has a model view controller, a client side model view controller. And it's not just a model view controller. I'll be telling you, it is more than MVC. So hence AngularJS is also referred to as MV star or MVVM, or simply MV star framework. So we can add the star with either C or VM or anything. Right. It also have filters on the UI side, so that any small the cosmetic changes that can be done on the filters, and we can also provide our custom filters. And it also comes with services and factories that we actually use to have common implementation, common services that will be used by the application. We can refactor out the common pieces across the AngularJS framework, and then provide services. And also it provides expressions. It also have something called as directives, which helps you to provide, which also helps you to create your own directives, and you can create domain specific language. So when I speak about domain specific language, we can create custom directives in our application, which are specifically to create some components that can be used across the application or the company wide. So having these kind of directive components help us to plug and play these directives in different kinds of the projects within the same company. Okay, so this gives a way to teach HTML new tricks. Okay, I will be showing that in the demo. We can also have templates. We can also have modules. We have something called a scope, which actually acts as a glue between the controller and the model in the view, sorry. And we can also have validations. Apart from this, it also provides the feature wherein we can have the handle the back button in the browser. We can create single page web application, a full single page web application. So we have MVC and MVVM. So MVC is nothing but model view controller that most of us are familiar with if you're coming from server-side programming. MVW is something called a model view model. Okay, so that also I'll be showing. Okay, so we have MVC wherein we have a model. In this case, say for example, we can integrate with RESTful services on the backend, and we also have a controller which also has JavaScript and the services, and then we also have view. The good thing about AngularJS is it provides two-way binding. So we have a view and a model. So once we attach a model with a view, so any changes that we do on the model side will be reflected on the UI side. And similarly, any changes that we do on the UI side, that will be done on the model side. So everything will be reflected. So we don't have to do any DOM manipulation to update the model, or when we update the model, we don't have to do any DOM manipulation to reflect it on the UI side. So hence it is called as MVW, MV whatever. So whatever may be controller, or it can be a directive, or it can be unit test, right? So that's the reason we call it MV star. So I'll be walking you through the first program, and then let's see all the magic in place. Okay, so have AngularJS, we need to include AngularJS. Okay, and then I'll be showing this demo. So we have to include this, and we have to add a root element called ng app. Okay, and I'll be showing that. So let's start with the demo so that we get comfortable and um, okay. Okay, for people who are new, they want to explore AngularJS, this is a website, angularjs.org, and for developers, they can have a reference, quick reference to the API reference. So here it provides all the details for the service or the different features that we're talking about. We have services, we have factories, we have directives, right? And we have providers, we have filters, right? So all of these things, it is provided by default. So let's start. So I'll be using a tool called Plunker. Okay, I'll be creating a new project here. So this is a tool wherein we can create AngularJS application or JavaScript applications, which can be used for collaborating with other developers. And I encourage the participant to start working on this if you are on your browser, so that we can follow along. So first of all, we need to include the AngularJS in our application. So I'll go with 4.8, and then I will say add. So what this does is basically it adds the AngularJS in the head section. Along with that, let's add jQuery also. So just go here and then add this. Yeah. So remember one point that I was making, that by default AngularJS will use by default AngularJS by default AngularJS will use the mini version of jQuery, but if we want, we can use the full version of jQuery. Only thing is that we have to place the jQuery tag above the AngularJS. So with this, AngularJS will use the full version of jQuery instead of the mini version that comes by default. Okay, so the beauty of Plunker is basically you can edit the code and you can see the output here itself, so that you don't have to set up some time for creating your own environment. Okay, so this is good for our webinar, so that I can share you the link for Plunker and then you can explore it even further. So let's start with a simple thing. Now that we have all the jQuery and AngularJS included, let's start with our basic version of our uh, AngularJS application. As I said you, it actually we need to add the ng app in our the root section. So we can either have a root section on the body, or we can have it at the HTML. Any version, anything should be fine. Okay. So let me go ahead and add this ng app, and this is a plain with the minimum version of the AngularJS that we can have. So let's start with seeing what is the features that it gets out of the box. Okay. So let's say we have an input type is equal to text. We have input for our type text, and then so let's if we add some text here, we should be able to get the handle of the element to manipulate that. Suppose if you want to print this whatever we put inside this, whatever enter in this. So the traditional way is to use the DOM API, that is document.getElement by ID, and then we have to put it on the console, right? So here I will just use the first version of the AngularJS, wherein this provides a lot of details on how it works. So first we'll add some there's something called as ng model. Let's see it as name. Okay. So what we have done here is basically we are adding an attribute to our HTML tag, which is ng model, and when we are giving it a particular name. So this can be any name, this can be any name, and then you can see here that we are basically adding a new attribute which is not there in HTML spec. Correct. So if you see any attribute or any tag which starts with ng, those are AngularJS specific directives. Okay, these are nothing but the directives that which are built in the AngularJS. Okay, so what this does is basically any directives, it teaches HTML new tricks. So HTML is a dumb language in the sense it is only used for displaying the content, but what we are adding here is we are more adding a behavior to our HTML, right? So this type of programming is called as declarative kind of programming. So if you see from jQuery, which is imperative programming, we get the handle of this and then we do the logic of doing the DOM manipulation. But here it's a more of a declarative programming where we assign a model. So ng model stands for directive where we assign a model to a particular element. So what this does is basically we are adding a reference to name which is there as a model which is registered, and whatever the text that we enter inside this text will be assigned to this model. Okay. Similarly, what we have done is we are adding a squiggly brackets and then we are binding this name to this name. So remember that this both should be same. The reason being, so this represents the view and this represents the model. So effectively what we have done is we have binded the view to a particular model. So once this is done, this is a two-way binding, and then we don't have to do any DOM manipulation. So this is a declarative rate of programming where we work only on the binding a view with a model. And once we have bound a view with a model, any updates which are done on the model will reflect on the view, and any changes that we do on the view will reflect on the model. So let's see. So I add name and see, we should be able to see the name that we entered here, right? Similarly, if we change the name, it will be reflected in the this particular thing. So any change that we do here, it will be reflecting on the UI. So it is almost as instantaneous as we type along, right? So this is the minimum a demo that we can see for a particular AngularJS in action. So all this happened because the AngularJS was kicked in by loading this file, and then it looks for an ng app. So once it looks for an ng app, it actually understands this is an AngularJS application, and it will when it loads, it sees an ng model, so it binds this particular text element with a name. And also whenever we are referring to the name, it actually binds this name. So whenever we change the model, it updates the view, and whenever we change the view, it updates the model. Okay, so now next we will get into a bit more advanced topic in this one. So here we have explored the directive part of it. Okay, so we have some more things in AngularJS wherein we can create custom directives, we can create custom components, we can also create custom elements also in AngularJS. Okay, so the next example that I want to show is basically how do we this is a basic example. Let's see for one more example. We say ng init. So this is one of the other directive where we can initialize a model. Okay. Say I have some persons is equal to I have an array of person. Okay, and then we have sorry, or just start with IDs. Okay, so we'll be doing progressive enhancements where we'll start with something basic and then we'll build on top of that. So let's say we have an UL and we have LI. So next element that I want to show is basically ng repeat. So here we have ng init and we provide an variable which has the items, and then we have ng repeat. So what we have done basically we have initialized a model, correct, and we have assigned it a value of IDs, and then we have added few elements in an array. And then down top bottom what we are doing is we are basically displaying that elements. Notice that here I have used an li tag, a ul and li tags, but I am just using the ng repeat tag. This basically iterates this IDs which is defined as a model. Okay, and then it takes one element from the array each time, and then what we are doing is basically we are showing it as an UI, correct. So this is the same variable which we use here. So both of them should be same. Okay, so this is another element where you're already seeing the benefits of that, which no programming from our side. So this kind of program is called as declarative programming, and this is the reason why AngularJS, the development of features in AngularJS is much faster and more neat than compared to jQuery, because here most of the abstraction, most of the DOM manipulation code is taken over, and then we have a neat your neat interface where we'll be using that in our program. Okay. Moreover, this can be used by the designers, HTML developers, because these are added attributes. Once we get hold of the attributes, it is easy for us to integrate this in our HTML. So one more thing that I want to talk about is we can either have X or data. Since this is from the recent HTML spec that any element we can have data hyphen as a prefix. This should be working fine. So now let's add few more things and then we'll see. Let's say we have persons here, and I already have a sample data that I thought of using here. I put this. It basically contains now that we have person, sorry, in person. Okay, and we can have okay. So here we can see we have a list of array of person element. Each person has name, age, location. So we have an array, and then we could use this similar to for loop. We can loop through the using the data ng repeat, and then we can assign, we can get the value of person dot name here. Okay. So this prints out all the names of the person. So let's add a little bit of filters that we were talking about earlier. So say I want to order them by name or something. So order by, say, name. So this makes sure that it orders them by the name. So if you want to have it in a different order, we can have either true or false. So documentation of that can be found here. That is basically, we have this documentation. It provides all the variables, for example, to get the first element, to get the index of the element, to get the middle, to get the last, to get the even and all. So it also gives you sample examples how we can use this, okay. So let's come back to this. So this is one way of ordering that. So we can also use some of the built-in filters that we have. For example, suppose I want to bind this element with whatever that I am entering, and I want to filter those elements. So what I can do is basically I have a person, and I can actually filter them first. So here we can see that we are basically applying a filter to this which is bound to this model. So whenever we add anything, we will be able to filter based on the item that we have bound to, and then again later on top of that we are adding the order by clause. So let's say we are adding we started something m, so m is found here. So we will be able to see this detail. Okay. Let's say Praveen. See, P has in Praveen, P has in Pradeep and Praveen. The moment we come to D, it's actually gone. So this is how powerful it is. By using minimum things which is already given, we'll be able to leverage maximum out of it, right? Okay, there are some couple of other built-in directives that I will quickly go through. We have ng-app that we already saw. We have ng-disabled, ng-class, ng-controller, right? So we also have filters, uppercase, lowercase, and we can use this. Basically, this is used to beautify the code and do some filtering on the server client side without doing any business logic. Okay, these are the available filters. And then coming to the single page application. So traditionally, if you see any application, I'll just show you. For example, it's say ICICI Bank. So you have a web page like this, and if you try to do login, the entire page refreshes, right? So if you try to click, everything changes. So the entire page gets loaded. Correct. So this involves lot of communication with the server, lot of bandwidth that is required. So lot of HTTP calls to actually get the whole data. Whereas we might want to load only the sections that are changing, keeping the remaining page the same, minimizing the number of calls that we make to the server, and then increasing the performance of the application. Right. I will give you an example of how we can have this in particular thing. Say we have gmail.com. So this is an example of single page application where say initially it takes some time to load all the content, but once you are done, you can just switch around and all the other pieces remains the same. Only the change part, only the required part just changes, right? So you can see that only this part changes, whereas the remaining parts are still the same. So this is the advantages of having that, because it loads only this particular partials and only the data that we need for this particular partial. The remaining things will be common, will be untouched. Okay, so this is one of these things, and AngularJS is very designed to build single page applications. So that I'll be showing you with a small demo. We'll come back to the Plunker. Okay, now that we have the model and the view on the same page, let's abstract this out and put this inside something called as controllers. Okay, so before that, when we saw we have used this ng app, we also have something called as modules. Okay, let me quickly tell what is modules. So modules are basically the containers. So any Angular applications will have, say, directives, right? It will have controllers, each playing a specific role inside the AngularJS application. We have directives, we have controllers, we have config, we have services, we have factories. Okay. So the directives, there are three different kinds of directories. One is structural directories. These are used to create a components or widgets which can be plugged into any HTML to come up with a component. We also have decorator directories, which is basically the one that we saw where we actually loop through a number of elements in an array and then dynamically generate the li tags, right? So these are nothing but decorative directories. Okay. And then behavioral directives, there are nothing but for each and every action or events we'll be using that. Examples of that are ng-click, ng-show, ng-hide. So these, based on a particular event, these will decide what are the action that has to be done on the browser. So there are three types of directories. There are built-in directories. We can create custom directories, right? So we also have controllers. Controllers are basically the C in the controller. What it does is basically we can configure the routes. If the request is in home, what is the controller that needs to be taken, and what is the view that needs to be loaded. Remember, in a single page application, when I was talking, so all this header section remains the same, the footer section remains the same, and we have some dashboard use cases here. So whenever we click on any of these items, only these things gets changed. So whenever we click on this, a particular route is called. When a particular route is called, the corresponding controller will be called, and the view will be loaded. The view will be loaded here. Okay, so this gives us a clean segregation of views and the service which the controller will be calling. Yeah. So also we have services that can be injected into the controllers, basically to make HTTP calls, right, or to provide a location service. There are different services that are available which we can leverage. It also we can create our own custom services. There is also a config, right? And all the other things that comes out of the box is basically handling the back button on the browser. This is also taken care in case of AngularJS. One more thing, interesting things that is in AngularJS that we can have is basically we can use something called as template cache, using which all the HTML will be bundled, zipped, compressed, and then loaded on the HTML for the first time. So once all the HTML, all the partials are loaded, only thing that will only whenever we create a route, only the request will be made to the server to get the data. All the HTML will be there on the client side in a minified file. So only a server call will be made to get the data. So making the application very fast and responsive, okay, compared to traditional web application. Okay. So now that we have created a model and a view inside the same HTML, let's abstract this outside into a controller. Okay, and then we can have list of controllers here, but what we'll be doing is we'll create a module. In AngularJS, a module is basically a container for having these directives, for having the controllers, for having the services. So all of these a little bit independent modules, independent components can be plugged inside a single module, which will be used in our application. So I'll just show you how to do it. So I'm just opening this one, and then we can define a root module or a central module, single module that will be using in our it will be used in our application for my app. Okay, we'll be using something called angular dot module, say my app. Okay, so now that we have created a container, basically we can create any number of controllers, we can create services, directives inside this module. So let's start with creating a simple controller. So I'll create a module and I add a controller into this. Okay, so control is basically we have to given a name to the controller, say person list ctrl, and then the second argument that we need to pass is basically a function. Okay, I'm creating an anonymous function here. So this particular controller can be called whenever we want to call this particular function. So as I said you, it automatically injects the dependencies into the controller. So I want to use the scope. So as discussed, scope is basically a glue between the model and the view. So whatever we want to have a model bounded to a particular view, we'll be putting those data inside the scope. Okay, so I'll go back to HTML file, and I actually copy this. So data ng init is just to test independently, but the more sophisticated or more practical way is to define a scope and then bind the data to it. So I'm adding data, I'm adding scope dot persons is equal to, paste this. Okay, so we have scope dot persons is equal to, we don't have to have this now that, okay. Now that we have abstracted out the array and put it inside this particular scope, now that we have bound the object into a scope, and object is an array which contains all the user objects. Now we'll come back to here, and then all this should be working fine. Let's verify the same here. Okay, okay. So thing is, we have created a module here, but we need to inject this module into our AngularJS application, right? So I come here, I just app is equal to, we have to define what is the module. So once we define a module, so we'll be able to get that here. I can define the controller. So in this case, the model, the ng controller will be bound to a person list controller that we already have defined. So that person is equal to, let's see what is the person. So this tells that it is not bound to this particular thing. Let me see what is that. So we can debug this application. Okay, I think we had ng model here. Okay, okay. So the reason was basically, I'll tell you. So whenever we add the module here, we also need to add the dependencies that we might have to add. The reason is, so we have our application and we have bound it to use a my app module, correct? So this module might have some other dependencies. It might be using, we might be using some other modules internally, right? So modules are nothing but it contains controllers, services, and directives, all of this. So we have to give initialize that with thing. We can also give the services or other components here. So that is mandatory, and the moment we add that, and currently for this is a standalone application, we don't have any dependencies, so we'll be able to get all these things. And let's see if this is working fine as before. Okay, so I just have to bind this to a particular thing. So okay, so we have bound that to this, and this is working fine again. Okay, so this is basically how do we create a modular application where we have created a module, and then we have created a controller, and this controller is being used in our application. Okay, so next we'll add some routes and see how it works in a single page application. The current thing is basically we have a body and we have some tags here, but this whole objective of a single page web application is basically to have a single page, and we have to abstract all the routing, we have to abstract the controller logic and also the view logic. So we'll see that in action now. So first we have created a controller. Now we'll add a route. For this route, we'll have to inject a module dependencies. So for this, we have to use something called as ng route. So from this ng route is not available by in AngularJS by default. So we'll have to inject this. How do we inject this? We come here, we again go for external and search for resources. Route. Route, and we get this here, and I add this here. So we have the route added to the AngularJS. So now this will be available to our application. So how we can configure the route now? So show you how. So again we add Angular app dot config. So this is a configuration setup that I do. So here I will have to give the function definition, and in this case now we'll be injecting the route provider. Route provider, and also we'll have to give, we'll be using the route service now. So this is nothing but the service that we are injecting. Okay, so route, we have to tell for example what are the different routes. So routes are basically, we have to give the path. So when it is by default, what is that we need to go, what is the controller that we need to bind to, and what is the HTML that we bound to. So here I am giving the controller definition. What is the controller? So I'll bound this to this particular controller. Okay, and we also have to give the view definition. So that we give by using the template URL, and I can give some main dot sorry person dot html. So here we can create a new file called person dot html. Okay, so what I can do now is basically I can remove all of these things. Okay, and put it inside my person.html. So this way, what we are doing is basically we are abstracting that with a more logical segregation. So this loads the particular HTML section only when the route is specified. There are some other things that we need to do. We have to go here, and here we have to use ng view. Okay, so this is how we need to do. Now the index.html is clean. We only have a body content. We load the script. This will be loaded for the first time, and hence after any changes in the route, it will actually refer to the we don't even need this since we have already defined that. So any change in the route, so this particular config will be set up. So any changes in the route will be able to assign a particular controller and what is the HTML for this. Okay, now let's see this in action. We have HTML defined here. We have already defined this one. In HTML we have the route service already defined. Okay, and we have added this with ngView. See, so this particular partials is getting executed in this file. So we can create routes here, many routes, and then this application is a full-fledged single page application. Okay, so we can create services, we can create directives, we can inject services, we can create factories, we can create services, we can create custom directories, and also you can use filters. So this is a gist of where we are landing to, or where we are headed to. Uh, if you can see here, I'm not using anywhere I'm doing the imperative programming where I'm using DOM manipulation directly. I'm using AngularJS abstraction, and this need looks pretty much the HTML standard. We are not using any code manipulation logic inside the HTML, and then we are doing that control logic here. So here I'm just adding this into the scope directly, but here we can use some HTTP service, $HTTP service or a resource service to actually fetch this data from a resource API, server API. Okay, so we already started getting the taste of what we are going to do in AngularJS when building a single page web application, right? So let me take some quick questions here. Yeah, so let me take questions that are here, and all the questions will be answered, and I'll be sharing you the link for this Plunker. You can try out with examples, and then you can also browse through the API and then do some examples to get familiar with AngularJS. So this is much more cleaner way and then much more productive way to for developing single page web applications. Yeah, so let me take some questions here. Yeah, the PPT will be shared, and I'll be also sharing the link for the Plunker. Okay, what is the DOM inconsistency problem with the browser? This is asked by Dilip Mishra. So as we can understand, initially the Internet Explorer, the Firefox, the Safari, and Chrome, all of them have DOM parser engines. So there was no a standard as such. Everybody were there implementing their own way of interpreting the HTML. Everybody has. There is no standard way of working in the DOM. In the earlier days, and nowadays they are all coming together under the same umbrella to actually work and then remove the inconsistencies, but we still have to work with the legacy browser, the legacy version of Internet Explorer, the legacy version to support them. So that is the reason there is a lot of DOM inconsistencies, and jQuery helps us in addressing these browser bugs. Okay, this is one of the good question for a beginner. Is there any relationship between Node.js and AngularJS? Yeah, so this is the reason I first initially told AngularJS is fully completely client-side framework. We brought in the MVC from which was there on the server till now to on the client side, and the server is only uh, connected, or we call the server to get the data, but all the magic happens on the client side. Node.js is one of the framework that gives we can use that to provide the RESTful services. Um, and Node.js is a server-side programming, like a server-side framework which is built in JavaScript. So JavaScript not only has is only restricted to UI, but people started using JavaScript to develop server-side applications also. So that's the reason Node.js is we can run, if you know JavaScript, we can also run or work on Node.js, Node.js server, Node.js framework. So this creates an homogeneous environment where people can work from complete client-side framework like JavaScript, AngularJS, also work on backend like Node.js server, and also if you have working on a database like NoSQL database like MongoDB, so it's a homogeneous environment, because at the end of the day we store documents in MongoDB, which is nothing but JSON. So it's a homogeneous environment. There won't be any parsing requires the way we have it in Java, like XML to Java, Java to XML. So it's a homogeneous environment, JavaScript from right from the client side till the DB side. So this results in a faster iterative development, and more people can work on any layer. I guess I have answered this question. Right? Node.js is a server-side framework. What if we have two H1? So H1 is basically a header tag that we add it into the application. We can have any. It's not a must that we have to have only one head one, but for when we are going for SEOs and all, they prefer having only one H1 tag. That is more to do with HTML and web development, and the emphasis here was more on AngularJS. We can have headers. We can have and browser will not restrict us to having more than one HTML, but for SEO and all, it will be not good. Yeah. So Ramesh Babu had answered a question. Can we separate JavaScript code in JS file? Definitely. Here, what I have done initially, I started with the HTML file, so only file, so that I wanted to show you how to have the basic minimum bare bones stuff, and then we sorted out all the JavaScript. We removed all the JavaScript from HTML and put it inside the server script. Right. I will be sharing you this link. We can play around with this fiddle, and then. Let me know if you have any issues. Right? What is a REST service? RESTful service, or REST service that we call, is basically uh, a stateless service who actually spits out the data in the form of JSON or XML, right? So it is so it is a web service over HTTP protocol. So it is very popular nowadays to actually we treat them as a resource on the server. All the operations that we do is treated as a operation on the resource which is residing on the server. So we can use the standard HTTP protocols like get, put, post, right, delete operations which are there on the resource. Right? So we can use the HTTP verbs to actually work or manage the resource. So it helps us easy to work on CRUD kind of application where we have create, read, update, and delete kind of operation. Create, read, delete, update operations. What is Bootstrap? Bootstrap, it's an overloaded term. Bootstrap, we have a CSS framework which helps us to create a responsive grid. Bootstrap in this context of the webinar is basically to create to set up all the environments and come up with an application environment. Okay. Yeah. So Shubhankar Roy. Yeah. So Shubhankar Roy, the Bootstrap is a CSS framework. Also, we can use Bootstrap in a overloaded term to bootstrap an application. Okay, there is a question from Hemant. Hemant is asking, what is a directive? Directive is basically a custom component which we can develop because HTML has only few tags, or it is only it is developed to represent the markup, right? The sole purpose of HTML is to create markup that can be understood by browser. Any new component that we want to create will not be able to extend HTML spec, because it will be specific to our need. So AngularJS gives us a way to create components, our user own components, which we can use in our application, and AngularJS will take the heavy lifting to render that component. So with HTML, with AngularJS, we can create custom components, correct. Also, we can teach HTML new tricks. For example, earlier what we used to do with the on-click, right? We used to add the on-click function into the HTML tag, and then we used to address that in our JavaScript. Then later we added in jQuery, we used the element, and then on-click we bind that element. So in AngularJS, it's a neat way wherein we don't have to add this binding event, and we just have to I'll show you. The thing is basically, I'll show you. So basically, if you go to person and we have, say, a button, we can have name, submit. Okay, and earlier we used to do on click, right? On click. So this is not good, since we are using JavaScript code. We are adding this element. So the other way was basically to add an ID here, ID attribute in jQuery, and use that to bind an element. So in AngularJS, it's a more neat way wherein we can use ng click, okay, is equal to, we can provide the function name, uh, handle. Okay, so this click handle will be able to use this in the inner controller. So in this controller, I already have declared scope element. So similarly, we can have dollar scope dot the method click handle is equal to function, right? And then we can add, I'll show you. So this way we can abstract all the code that we had in our HTML to on the controller side. Okay, so this is the advantages of AngularJS. I'll take the remaining questions. Hope this is clear. Okay, so how can we start debugging in AngularJS? I mean, extra plugin required? No, we can use the Chrome's or Firefox, if whichever the browser that we are using. We can use the console window of the browser to actually do the debugging. No need to have any extra plugins. Okay, I am using 1.4. The reason being that there are other versions of AngularJS also. The latest being Angular 2.0, which is in which the authors or the developers have revamped the entire AngularJS. So AngularJS 2.0 is totally different from AngularJS 1.x, and it is still in beta stage. So hopefully by next year it will be in we can use that in production. But I'm using 1.4 version here. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Praveen. I had missed a 10G repeat. Yeah. Yes, so we can create a map in AngularJS. So it's typical JavaScript. If you are good at JavaScript, understanding AngularJS is just about understanding the right design patterns. The AngularJS requires a radical shift in the mindset of how we used to develop earlier using jQuery. But once we understand the big picture, understanding the nitty-gritty details of AngularJS will actually help us to think the way that we need to develop the single-page app application. ng-init, Tarun, ng-init is basically used to initialize a model value so that we don't have to do it on the controller. So this is just a basic directive that we can simply use to just try run and then just to show a simple example. So basically to initialize the model, we can do it using the directive itself. Okay, if we use without data ng repeat, what will happen? So in browser we have something in HTML5. They have added a specification in the specification stating that any attribute that any custom attribute that we want to have apart from what is supported by HTML5, that can be prefixed with the data dash. So this is just a spec if you want to adhere to spec. Since ng repeat is a custom directive from AngularJS, we can append that prefix with data dash to be compliance with HTML file. Okay, we can also use templates. Yeah, we have used, I showed you how to create a partial file, and that we can create a templates. Yes. Yes, so Harita is asking, can we change the div color using model? Yes, we can change the color. There is something called as ng class that you can refer on the AngularJS API that shows how to work with the colors. We can apply classes dynamically using ng class. Okay, Harita, I think I have answered your question. Yeah, Krishnath. Krishnath, sorry if I was pronounced your name correctly. You can ask me questions. I am open to answer all your questions. Yeah, so dependency module is basically yes. So we have an application and we have lots of controllers, directive services, right? So instead of adding them as single component, we can club all those components into a module. Module, you can think it of as a container which contains all the independent plug and play components. Once we add all the components inside the module, we'll be able to refer that module inside our application. Since module itself might have some other dependencies, right? So we'll have to we can inject those dependencies. As in this case, we can see our module had to we had to use the route service, right? A route is basically not provided by default AngularJS, so that is something that we need to add from an external source. So the moment we add that external service, we have to tell Angular that we want to use that service, and the service is basically in Angular ng route. So we have to inject that module into our module. So if you see here, we have added the ng route. So this is an external module. So similarly, we can have any number of external modules. So for example, if working in a project, if we have created our own set of controllers, modules and directives which are not tightly coupled to our application, which are standalone components, we can bundle them into our model into module, and we can inject this module. So this helps drastically to create a domain specific language, correct? So here we can create our own directives specific to our needs and requirements, and once we create a component, we can use that directive across the organization, correct? So this helps us to create domain specific modules and domain specific language. Okay. Yeah, so custom directive is basically we need to understand built-in directives and what are the different kinds of directives, Harita. And then once we understand that, we can extend that and create our own custom directives based on the needs. Typically, most of the directives, what we do generally is we actually search for the existing any other directives that are built in, or we can use any other open source libraries who provide us this the directives. If we use, we can directly inject them, or we can create our own custom directives, right? For example, the classic example is basically if you want to create a HTML table, right? So HTML table will have say for example pagination. So pagination is something which we can create our own directive, or we can leverage third party modules which are already developed. The AngularJS community is very strong. There are a lot of tons and tons of directives that we can actually search and leverage before we actually even start developing a directive. But if there is no directive which matches our specific needs, we can create our own directives. Yeah. So Ramesh Babu Chirla has a question: how we pass JSON from HTML to JS file? So JSON from HTML to JS file. I think it should be the other way, from JS file to HTML, right? How we actually get the data from a JSON file, JS file to HTML. Initially, in this application that I showed you, we actually I showed you by adding the JSON data directly in the HTML. Then I segregated out that and put it inside externally in the script folder, right? Okay, so Abhay has a very good question. He's asking, can we achieve all the functionality of jQuery in AngularJS? I mean, can we totally depend on AngularJS? Yes, Abhay, jQuery is just here to address only DOM manipulation thing, right? So we can leverage jQuery, and I said you earlier, AngularJS internally uses the minified version of mini version of jQuery, that is JQ Lite. So it has limited functionality which is required, but if you want to have full-fledged jQuery, we just have to include jQuery and make sure that we write the script tag of AngularJS after jQuery has loaded. So what this does is, once jQuery is loaded, AngularJS will use the full version of jQuery instead of using the built-in light version of jQuery. Hope I have answered your question. Okay. Uh, Saravanan has a very good question. Is there a way I can load HTTP based resource in HTTP? Yes, we can definitely do it. Okay. Sunny has a question. What is Angular UI? Angular UI is a separate group who actually fork the repository from AngularJS and have created custom components, right? For example, the best example would be the UI route. Okay, Hemant is asking a question: what, how to learn integration with Express.js? Any particular link material? I'm not covering the Node.js aspect of it. Express.js comes on the server side where we use Node.js. Express.js is basically the MV frame of the framework on the server side. Okay. The agenda of this webinar and the course that will be continuing will be only pure on AngularJS. However, we'll be using some REST API to develop REST API. We might be using the Express.js or Node.js. Okay, Sukirti, sorry, Sukirti is asking a question: what's the between services and factories? Okay, very good question. Services and factories both serve the same purpose. Just a sec. Okay, services and factory both serve the same purpose almost, but the crucial difference between services and factories: services is a singleton object, whereas factory is we get a new instance. For example, in Java, if you have used we use a data source or a service to actually uh, which is log service or something which is common for the entire application, but factory is to get a new instances. The similar way in AngularJS also we have services. We actually we for example, if we want to make HTTP calls, so we can write a service wherein we can define a code to make HTTP calls, which will be used by entire application. Factories, on the other hand, to actually get an instance of each new object every time. Correct. So that's a basic difference between services and factories. Yes, Anita, I think if you have worked on struts, it's similar to that, but this is happening on the client side. As I said, you now the server side is purely to fetch the data. Yeah. So, Hibendra, I think I was able to answer your question. What is the difference between factory and services? Both looks the same, but only thing is difference is in the services we will be using this and we'll be returning this, but in factory we'll be creating a new object every time. Okay. Yeah, will this work on HTTP as well? Yes, it works. Yes. Guy has a question stating that whether we can use MongoDB database. Yeah. So with because of time constraint, I just had to emphasize more on the AngularJS concepts, how we can create component services modules. But in real time, instead of just putting that inside the controller will make a HTTP service call to get the data, and then the control will take over from there to actually manipulate the data. Okay. Can Ajax be used to get server communication? Ajax is basically used to call the server, make a HTTP request to the server, and get the data. Karibasapa is asking, so Node.js is better than Spring Framework for backend. Basically, there are a lot of factors that we cannot compare oranges with apples. Spring is basically for Java framework, as what Node.js is for JavaScript. So both has its own strengths and weaknesses, but both of them serve the same purpose of creating the uh, server-side framework. AngularJS version is not released. Yes, AngularJS 2 is completely different than AngularJS 1. Um, but having a basic understanding of AngularJS 1.x will be very helpful, so that when we move to AngularJS 2.0, we'll be coming to know why this change was done, and second thing is it's still in beta, and then lot of applications have to be migrated from 1.x to 2.x. That might happen, and there might be a curve restriction. So people will be comfortable with 1.x, or there will be migration project from 1.x to 2.x, since 2.x is radically different. So there will be 1.x for quite some time. So having understanding of AngularJS 1.0 is also good in my perspective. Okay, is Node.js similar to Apache Tomcat server, or is it particularly JavaScript related thing? So Node.js is basically a JavaScript framework, um, but it's not Tomcat. Tomcat is a container, but Node.js is actually the web framework. What is a controller? Similar to what we have on server side, we have a controller who what based on a route, it goes and fetches the data from the server, and then gets it. So control is basically to get to the model, get call the service and get the data. Where do we use template to build a single page application where we want to only load a specific section? There will be using the template. We can use both jQuery and AngularJS in the same project. Yes, I have mentioned it couple of times. Okay. No, we cannot connect directly to a database using the HTTP server. Shivraj is asking a question whether we can connect to database using directly HTTP server. No, we have to go through a REST service. Okay. I'll take few more questions, and then we'll wrap up for this today. But any questions, feel free to send your email to support@edureka.com. What is the difference between practice and service? I think I've already told you, explained. Is there an advantage in terms of performance in AngularJS or jQuery or JavaScript? Definitely. With tools like, for example, if you are using tools like Grunt, Bower, Yeoman, we'll be able to package the entire application and zip it, compress. And with that, what happens is basically all the HTML files will be sitting on the client side, and the server request will be made only to fetch the data. So that's a huge performance gain. No, Pawan is asking a question. Do you think AngularJS will bypass jQuery in the near future? No, no way. Both are here for different purposes, and both are will be here for a long time. Yes, Krishnath is asking, will learning AngularJS 1 help learning AngularJS 2? So, definitely, my personal perspective is definitely AngularJS 1. If you understand, there are so many things that AngularJS is coming, features different than AngularJS 1. So, we'll be able to comprehensively understand the core framework of AngularJS 2, as in what is the reason the changes was done when with respect to Angular 1. So this will definitely help us to get a better grip on AngularJS 2, since we'll be knowing this library from the beginning. And any one of there are other frameworks also, and any investment in learning UI framework, AngularJS is the way to go, because the efforts whatever we put in learning, it is long term. So because there is no other framework which is even as close to AngularJS. So definitely investing time and effort learning AngularJS 1 will be useful, because AngularJS 2 is not coming so soon. So over the time AngularJS 2 is released officially for production, we'll be in a very good position to understand and learn AngularJS 2 in detail. So that is my personal opinion. Do we need to specify ngIp in all HTML? No, okay, okay. In a single page application, so Praveen is asking, do we need to specify ngIp in all HTML file we created? There is only one page here, Praveen. This is the single page app application where index.html is only once loaded, and index HTML is where we add the ngIp. So all the remaining cells will be partials. Only the certain section of pages will be loaded. So we don't have to include this ng app in every partial. Only in the root of HTML tag we need to add this. Okay. Okay, what are the other fiddles that I can use? Can we use Sublime for AngularJS? Yes. Gayatri, this intention of this webinar was to quickly focus only on the AngularJS part without even getting into the installation or setting up the project, because that itself will take some time. And moreover, this Plunker is a very great tool wherein it allows for developers to collaborate with each other. We can create versions, and anytime if you're stuck in some AngularJS questions, to if you want to post it on Stack Overflow or forums, if you put it on a Plunker and share it, people will be able to give a good solution rather than just telling the issue directly, which is not going to help. So definitely getting hold of Plunker or code edit or JS fiddle will be helpful when we are trying to collaborate with other developers. Yeah, correct me my understanding. Harita is asking a question. We communicate with the server code using services in AngularJS like resource. Yes. So we can use HTTP or resource. So basically, the resource is a wrapper around HTTP, and resource is actually used to do high-level performance. For example, HTTP GET or POST. We can use a resource, but if there is any complication or if a resource is not able to address the requirement, we can fall back to HTTP. But internally, resource uses HTTP. Okay, Raghavendra says, somewhere I read AngularJS is opinionated language. I think if you can give me more details on what is the context, I'll be able to help you. Raghavendra, I'm sorry. Please, if you can help me in terms of what is the context, I'll be able to answer it or give my opinion. Yes, AngularJS is built from built. You can use unit testing. So by default, we can use unit testing. Okay. Sharafuddin is asking AngularJS is an asynchronous or synchronous. As AngularJS is not a asynchronous, means if I can understand making HTTP calls, it is asynchronous. HTTP is a generic in jQuery. JavaScript we use HTTP for making call asynchronous call. So AngularJS when doing HTTP it also uses asynchronous. Only thing is that we can use we can when we can call an HTTP service, we get two callback functions. One is success and one is failure. So we'll be handling the success as well as failure condition in the corresponding blocks. So we'll get a callback function whenever there is an update from the server side. Are services always inbuilt? No, we can create custom services also. I think we'll be going into detail of each of these independent modules in the course that we'll be providing from Edureka. Okay. Okay. Some few people are asking what is watch. Watch is basically whenever there is a change on the UI component. If you want to handle that event, we will be using watch. I think all these details will be covered in the session, in the class or in the course that we Edureka will be providing. Correct? Yeah. I think I have answered you in the gist, Saurabh, regarding watch. Okay, I think a couple of more questions, but I think I'll have to stop here. So please provide your feedback on the about this webinar and to cover a bit more. So to cover a bit more, I think I'll take one question. Actually, I don't have concern staying back, but I just wanted in your interest that you people will be staying back. But otherwise, I can answer all the questions today itself. Okay. Okay. So Lakshmi Prasad is asking a question. I don't know what is the question, but what is the easiest way to learn AngularJS? I think fundamentally, if you learn JavaScript good, if you invest your time and efforts in learning JavaScript, and then come back to this AngularJS, you'll be understanding good. So we'll be starting a batch from 5th December, wherein we'll be going in detail of each of these. Today's topic was just 1 hour, where I didn't get time to sufficient time to go through each, but I tried my best to actually get your hands on or get you feel what is AngularJS and what is it trying to solve. But yeah, a course, a dedicated course will be able to address all your questions and getting you comfortable with AngularJS. Yeah, with a limited time, I could do my best, and then I guess this was uh, helpful for you people. Yeah, so Sharafuddin Sharafuddin is asking, can we access ASP MVC model data using Angular? Yes, AngularJS is completely client-side library, and it abstracts us from using any of the REST service. Maybe it Node.js, and maybe it may be Java, or maybe it might be um, Ruby on Rails, or it can be ASP.NET. Anything which is providing a RESTful service will be able to consume the service. So Jane is asking, all logics will be seen to the user. How will we hide the logic to end user? What is going on the page? We'll be actually abstracting this logic inside the controller JavaScript, and we'll be doing so. I didn't come to know the context in which you are asking, Saurabh. The logic will be there inside the JavaScript, since we are using MVC on the client side. Okay. Okay, Harita is asking a very good question. Can you please brief on promises? As I said, you HTTP is asynchronous. That means when we call a particular resource, it will take some time to come back, right? Um, Promises here are a neat way to tell. Basically, for example, if we can create when we call a promise, when we call a REST service, we can actually create an object, an object which we can start using it in our application, and the content of the object will be provided or populated when the promise is resolved. So when the promise is resolved, the service will have to tell it is resolved, so that time we'll be able to get the value. If the promise can also be rejected because the network may be down or for some other reasons, in that case there will be rejection of the promise. In that case we will get an error, and we can handle both success callbacks as well as failure callbacks. So this isn't just, but I think you can look out for promise API. It is actually a JavaScript framework, but in AngularJS we use $Q service, Q service to actually integrate. So AngularJS uses Q to use promises. Okay, I think done for all the questions. Okay, friends. I think this was, I took half an hour more than what was discussed, and then I see still people. So any questions? I'll just take 2 minutes before we wind up for today. Hope this webinar was useful, and there's a batch starting from 5th, where we'll be going in detail of each of the topics. Yeah, Harita, today's webinar will be, the link will be shared, and also the Plunker URL will also be shared, so that you people can see the code, do some changes in the code, and see work on the code live before you start installing all the necessary tools and work on that. Yeah, you're welcome, Harita. Thanks, Lohita. Yes, I could do the best I could do in 1 hour. That is the reason I didn't go into the installation of editor, or means I didn't even show the editor or anything. I used the minimum resources to be on the point. Krishnath, I think we'll have to get in touch with Edureka to see when is the batch starting for AngularJS. Okay, thanks for the wonderful participation. Thanks for pouring in questions. There was a lot of questions. That effectively means that everyone was attentive, and then were very curious to learn this. Um, Enjoy learning AngularJS. I think it's a next big thing. We already have AngularJS 2 coming, so just the right time, I think, to invest in learning AngularJS. And future will be JavaScript will be too bright. So coming days, JavaScript will be playing a big role in development. So that is a way to go, and that will always be there. So no doubt about it. With this note, I would like to conclude this webinar, and feel free to ask questions, feedback, and queries to support@edureka.com. Thanks everyone. Thanks one and all.